The Voice Teacher Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Voice Teacher Podcast. I'm Amy Geddes here with Sam Johnson and a special guest today. We have Dr. Jon Skidmore. He is a licensed psychologist and he also is I'm going to get this wrong, performance psychologist instructor at BYU. Professor, I totally butchered that. He's going to correct me and make it sound really good and do all the fancy things. But last week we were talking about feeling imposter syndrome, about, gosh, as a teacher, you get going and you're just like, am I any good at this? Do I even know what I'm doing? Should I just quit? I'm just going to quit just now. I did not help that student and I'm done. I'm finished. You know, we have those days. And so we thought it'd be great to bring Dr. Jon on and give us some strategies as teachers. Normally, Jon works with performers and helping them work through their anxieties and things. But as teachers, you are a performer, but it's kind of a different ball game. It's the same, but it's different. So anyway, welcome, Jon. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into becoming a psychologist, particularly a performance psychologist.
You know, music's been a big part of my entire life. And I attended Utah State with a vocal scholarship. I did all kinds of stuff through, junior high, high school, and college. But it wasn't until I was working on a master's degree in counseling that I realized the counseling department had everything that I needed that I wished I'd had on my stage as a young performer. I mean, what did I hear as a performer to deal with nerves or to get ready? It was like practice a lot and practice a lot more and just keep practicing a lot more. And if you get nervous, take a deep breath. And that was about all I heard.
Well, that's all I heard growing up.
Yeah. And so suddenly I heard all these tools that could be used to help develop mindset and manage distorted thoughts and to address anxiety and to bring attention focus where you want it. It's like, wow, this is really cool stuff. I actually did my first performance workshop like 36 years ago. So I've been doing this for a long time. Yeah. And I went on to get my doctoral dissertation or my doctoral degree in clinical psychology. And I studied the peak performance experience with musicians. That was my dissertation. And so as quickly as I could, I had an opportunity to start a class, the psychology of music performance at Brigham Young University. And I've been teaching that ever since. That's over 30 years there teaching that. And I've had a chance to work with performers worldwide. And what I get so excited about is the simplicity of so many of these tools that I can share can have such powerful results for teachers as well as students.
So when you started going more into psychology instead of like music performance, did you immediately start connecting the dots of this is really relevant for this population? Or did other people kind of say like, this is for music? Or did you kind of create this whole thing on your own?
Well, I discovered sports psychology. And I began to read all the books on sports psychology. And then I began to apply it immediately. I was performing with a group called University Singers at BYU. And I started doing little like, hey, I just read this in a book. Can I try this with you? That kind of stuff. And just learning how to bring these ideas to the performing arts. Because again, practice a lot, practice more, practice harder doesn't get us the results we really want. There have been too many times we practiced more, we practiced harder, and we still didn't perform the way we wanted to perform.
You know, what's funny, you bring that up about sports psychology. So a while back, I was dealing with a lot of anxiety, and my husband had received a book from work called The Fearless Mind. And it actually took me a lot of courage to open that book and read it because I had so many cyclical thoughts going on. Well, it wasn't a romance novel. Come on. Who wants to read something else? No, the other books I read are like self-help books, so it's one or the other. But anyway, when I read this, I thought it really didn't actually calm my fears. It wasn't kind of what I thought it was going to be, but it was actually about tennis players. It was a sports psychology book. And it was fascinating to me because it was so applicable to my students and to singers. So I think that's really great that you bring that up, that, singing is not a very unique field in the way the mind approaches it. It's the same for everything, any kind of sport, any kind of activity that you want to get really good at.
Well, and we bring our mind to whatever it is we're doing and our experience as a performer. I mean, a spelling test in third grade is a performance.
Mm.
A piano recital when you're 9 years old is a performance.
Or a
Sometimes
test.
cleaning your room to a certain standard could be considered a performance, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, we definitely have a performance-oriented brain because we learned that a good performance is safer, it's more acceptable, it's better rewarded than a poor performance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a history class, and I got a C- in my history class. Okay, what were the consequences? What happened with that, or didn't? But again, we're really all performers, and how we approach performing and how we recognize what performing is all about is part of that challenge. This leads me right into the brain. Let me just kind of jump right into the brain here for a second.
Sure.
The part of our brain that deals with good and bad, right and wrong, safe and dangerous, it's called the amygdala. That part of the brain is fully developed by the time we're 2 years old. See, we're already learning what kinds of things are going to cause pain or cause pleasure. I was on a mountain trail. I looked down. I saw a $20 bill. I picked that up so fast. It's like, oh, whew, lunch paid for right there. Boom. I don't do that when I see a rattlesnake. Like a rattlesnake's, whoa, wait a minute, step back. Am I safe?
Shocker.
And so we have this automatic wiring in our brain that wants us to be safe. So that's survival. Now, a young child has so much to learn. And this is when we talk about the imposter syndrome. Oh, by the way, it's not an official clinical diagnosis. It's the title of a book that's made somebody a lot of money, and it's a great catchy title, and it's just what it is, okay? What it's really talking about is that natural first response that we all have. So let me just talk about that for a second. If we think of our midbrain, right between the ears and the amygdala, it gives us a first response. Boom, there it is. Well, what if I make a mistake? Do I know what I'm doing? Was that the right thing to suggest? That didn't work. Oh no. See, we have all these first responses that are just programmed into us. And so the first gem I want you to take away from today is your first response cannot be trusted. See, as a teacher, as an artist, you don't want to trust that first response. Why? That comes from the part of the brain that was trained by a 5-year-old. See, that 5-year-old never went through, I know, for example, all the hours in training to become a, certified IVTOM teacher, to get a degree in music. That 5-year-old didn't do that. All they learned back then was making a mistake was bad. Don't make a mistake. You didn't know the answer? Oh, shame on you. How embarrassing is that? See, that's what that 5-year-old was trained with. And so just taking today that your first response as a teacher is just your first response. And it's not true. Rarely is it true. It's just a first response.
That's really interesting because with so many of my students, it feels like I have kind of two jobs. One is let's do the car mechanic work on their voice. And the other is, can we notice when that first judgment comes in and then not value it? Do you have any strategies of how to kind of distance yourself from that? Because I feel like as soon as one of those thoughts comes in, the shame or even like just the thoughts or the feeling that distract us, that people just immediately identify with that and then they can't distance themselves from it at all.
They haven't been taught to distance themselves from it. They haven't been taught to disengage from that. So, for example, Sam, if I were your student and you were talking to me and said, okay, Jon, I want to introduce you to this idea that your first response in this lesson is not the response we're going to talk about. We want to talk about your second response or your third response. Well, that was terrible. No. Let's talk about your second response. Well, I've never been able to get that sound out of me before. It's still kind of weird. Okay, let's talk about that response. So setting up a lesson that we're not going to have first response conversations is very interesting. We'll talk about a second, third, or fourth response, but not a first response. Now, one really simple and amazingly effective tool with this, I call this the 5 ands. Okay, so Sam, let's just kind of role play with me on this. So let's just say, I can't do it.
I can't do it.
So your first response was, you're right, Sam, you can't.
Doesn't feel good.
You're stuck, aren't you? Okay. So let's just suppose I'm the teacher here and you say, I can't do this. Just say that again.
This.
And
I won't do it because I can't do it.
And
I don't know. What's next?
and
It sure makes you question those first thoughts, asking those ands.
well, the idea here is if you tell your students, okay, by the time I get to the fifth and, I want this turned around.
Okay.
I failed. That was devastating. And I really messed it up. And I have done better in the practice room. And, well, this is the first time I've ever auditioned in this kind of setting. And I've got a lot to learn about auditioning. So by the time you come through 5 ands, you can turn that around if they know that's what the goal is. I actually had one person, he had over 20 negative responses to that and. He's just like, and the world's coming to an end, and the world's coming to an end, and the world's coming to an end kind of thing. And it's like, okay, he still holds the record. But to have it set up that, okay, we've got 5 ands, we want this turned around and moving you in the direction you want to go. I mean, all of us at one point or another have felt like, well, I can never do that again. Now, there are things in life that are okay to say, I'm never doing that again and not doing that again. But, in the context of a performer, I'm never going to audition again. I'm never going to sing a solo again. I'm never going to, here's somebody who messed up so badly at her sister's wedding playing a Chopin piece that she said, I'm never going to play with Chopin again. She didn't want to play Chopin ever again because it was so terrible when she was 14. And I had to work with her quite a bit when her professor with a degree in piano performance said, Chopin's going to be a part of your senior recital. She did not want to play with Chopin. It was like, and I can play with Chopin.
That makes me think of an experience I had as a child, about 12 years old, 6th grade. And I was asked to sing at our 6th grade dance festival. And I sang this song about our state. And I sang it in like an octave higher than it was supposed to be sung. And it was really terrible.
It sounds amazing to me.
No, it was bad. It was bad. And even my mom, I think, was really embarrassed. But, she was a good sport about it. And other people would comment and, we kind of had some back and forth about it. And I was just like, I think I was kind of unfazed by it. I was like, well, I'll just do it again. Like I didn't ever want to quit. But I think for me, something I've had to tell my students over the years is that it's okay to mess up. I've had terrible performances. I've had things like that happen or where I've, just been so off key. And I have recordings of these things that are horrendous. But yet, if you just kind of expect that to be part of the process, do you think that's healthy?
It's important to recognize that this is not about mastery. I mean, the physicians we've all been to, they practice medicine. I mean, as voice teachers, you practice teaching voice. You haven't mastered everything. And so again, as a musician, as a singer, okay, I don't have everything mastered, but I'm here to practice this. And I want to keep developing and keep practicing. It's a really fun attitude to embrace, because then when you make a mistake, it's like, well, I'm practicing this. And what do I want to learn from this?
I'm practicing performing. I'm practicing being on stage. I'm practicing these experiences.
I think that's a really powerful mindset.
See, from the midbrain, it is, Sam. See, from the midbrain, a performance is either a good or bad thing. It's either right or wrong. It was either success or failure. But when you take on that each performance is a practice in performing. And what is your goal? You want to just keep raising the quality. You want to keep bumping that needle. You are practicing to get better and better at what you're doing. You're refining, you're honing your craft. And I'm going to do this through practice.
So
I had a solo. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so I mean, that's essentially what voice teachers are doing to those who are feeling this quote unquote imposter syndrome. They need to remember that they're teaching is a practice, a
Yes.
craft that they're
Yes.
practicing every time. Sometimes that practice goes well, sometimes it doesn't. And even if they're getting paid for it, they don't need to feel bad about a practice that didn't hit the moon, because it's a practice.
How often do those practices really hit the moon? I mean, there's some awesome practices. And I remember some of those like, well, that was a great lesson, right?
That was so good.
But see, again, the curiosity of what this lesson is going to go like tonight, and what can I do with this student, and how can I help bring that richer sound into the voice, or how can okay, we got this little scoop going on here. How do we get that scoop out of their voice there, or whatever it might be? And we get to be curious about this, and we get to practice with this. And we also have to recognize we're not going to have all the answers. And that's okay too. If we as professionals, as teachers, put ourselves under the pressure of like, I'm supposed to have every answer for every student and each of their problems, that's going to be a real anxious kind of relationship. Because rather than saying like, whoa, I don't really know what to do with this. Okay. Or let's explore this and see where we go and see what happens, rather than, okay, what's the right thing here versus, oh, that didn't work. That must have been the wrong thing. So to be able to just step back and say, hey, we are learning together. We're practicing together. And when you think about the challenge of controlling a voice lesson, there's so many variables in your personal life, in your professional life, in their world, even the voice itself. There's a lot of variables we can't control. And so another real important thing as a teacher is to drop that expectation of control or perfectionism, which a lot of us struggle with, and get back to, okay, what can we create here? What can we move here? What can we do with this right now? And sometimes we just get to accept the very best we do kind of sucks. Like we were hoping for this mark up here and we landed down there. It's like, well, that's the best I could do today.
I just saw an article on NPR the other day that was 5 rules of improv that can affect your entire life. And the biggest one that always stands out to me is the yes and. And if you go into any sort of situation and you just kind of agree and build and transform on what other people are doing, it's good, versus the no, but just immediately stops everything. So I love this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the yes and is a wonderful tool to bring into our conversation. I mean, if you think of a lesson or if you think of performance, typically the majority of what you'd expect to see in that lesson is going to show up, isn't it? I mean, you've done a lot of lessons. You know what a lesson is going to look like. Okay, and chances are there are going to be a few things that don't work quite as you anticipated. How normal is that? Now, if there's a surprise, like there's a really big surprise there, like something, in a sense, you're on stage and one of the cast member faints, that's a surprise. Like we're not expecting that. That doesn't happen very often. Okay, we got to make some adjustments right now to deal with that. All expectations are off. It's like, how do we cope with that surprise as best we can? And that's where the yes and comes in. And what am I going to do? I'm going to assist that person step out of character. I saw a very interesting show. Well, I saw the Wizard of Oz at Hale Center Theater in Salt Lake City a few years ago. A delightful show, beautiful facility. The Scarecrow broke character. The final big scene, they're flailing as the witch is dragging him to, set him on fire. He kicks the stand that had the crystal ball on it, and it bounced off and bounced on the stage. Well, it didn't break. It was a ball. It was boing, boing. Well, his Scarecrow jumps up off the floor, grabs the ball, puts it back on the stand, and then went flailing back on the floor. It's like, he did not yes and that moment. I'm sure he heard about that and then, whoa, what were you doing? I mean,
well, like, yes, and he saved the day. Come on. That's right.
Yes. So anyway, see, that was a first response that he did not contain. It's like first response is, oh, if something's out of place, you did something wrong, put it back. No, he broke his character. When you think about the imposter, okay, let's just build off this phrase called character here for a moment. If you take a big breath and you ask yourself, okay, when I step into my best as a voice teacher, see, there's a character that you take on. You're listening, there's compassion, there's questioning, there is expertise, knowledge, tools, and skills, there's commitment. See, that's your character as a great voice teacher. Now, if something shows up, okay, someone you've been working with for 3 years finally says, Sam, look, this just is no longer I'm not getting what you're teaching me. We're not clicking. I'm not going where I want to go. I'm going to go see this Amy Geddes. I've heard that she's really good.
Yes, and
That's right, Sam. I'm going to steal all your
Take 'em.
students.
Take 'em away.
And just be like,
Now, so your first response to something like that could be taking you out of the character of the great teacher that you are. Uh-oh, I failed. I must have missed something. What didn't I know? What did I do wrong? Well, if you look at that as a first response, oh, okay. Well, when I step into the character of who I am as a teacher, I am a very different person. And I want to bring that best person, that best teacher to this lesson. Now, I can say as a psychologist, I certainly have not helped everybody I've worked with. I've helped a lot of people. And I know what it feels like to work with somebody and it's like, well, I don't want to work with you anymore. I used to be upset about that. It doesn't bother me so much anymore because it's like, I'm not the one to work with everybody. I'm not going to be that one that's going to fit with everybody. And I know that. So again, it's your style. It's who you are. It's your personality. It's their personality that's having to meet as well. And so to be able to recognize that you get to make the decision, are you in your best self, your best teacher character, or are you in your fearful character, or the part of us that wants to be seen as really good and really valued, and okay, and oh, they're not valuing me, or the part of us that wants to be known as competent and capable. I don't have the exact title, but in the last IFCOM conference, I did a presentation on the Imposter Syndrome, where I really looked at a lot of this stuff more in depth.
wait, which one was it? What year?
The last one, 2 years ago.
21?
I think
Or
21.
22? 21 or 22?
21. We haven't done one in 22, I don't think.
We did one in February.
Maybe it was February.
Okay.
Anyway, I really went into this idea of the imposter in us is really a part of who we are. And they want our success and they want us to do things right. And you could even look at the imposter as a protector. But again, this protector doesn't quite understand that as professionals, we're not going to be able to help everybody or fix every problem or even be able to get the sound we want from somebody. Now, it may have more to do with how many hours they practice and what they're practicing than what we're coaching them. And that happens sometimes as well. I went to a physical therapist and I mentioned how well my shoulder was doing. He goes, and all the physical therapist said was, well, that's what happens when you do the exercises. I was like, wow. Oh yeah, I have been doing those very diligently and I'm feeling really good. Like, well, that's what happens when you do that, So,
yes, it's always very clear the students that practice and the students that don't. And, it's interesting. I had a teacher that I'm mentoring. She mentioned that she wasn't making much progress with some of her students, but they weren't practicing. And she felt bad about taking their time or their money or whatever. She's like, how can I charge them if they're not progressing? And I'm like, well, people know how much practice they've actually done and kind of what to expect, and it's interesting to me because there are people who they just keep coming back for lessons, regardless of how often they practiced. They're happy to keep employing you as their coach, even though they're not doing anything. That's really fascinating to me.
That's been very helpful.
Don't you think you'd want to put in practice time?
That's been very helpful for my imposter syndrome through the years is that they just keep coming back. And even if I am beating myself up after a lesson or something, they just keep coming back. So I guess I'm doing what I need to.
Right. So you're doing enough for them in that moment. And if they choose to do any more with it, they're very aware of whether or not they've done anything with it, You
could also say they're getting what they want or need from the experience, which would be a great way to describe a success. Hey, they were getting what they needed from this experience. Obviously, a student who's going to practice for an hour a week is going to have a different kind of lesson than someone who's practicing a couple hours a day. But they're getting what they need. And again, it's not about our expectations as teachers. It's about where we can guide the people that we're working with.
I love that. That's great.
I have to constantly remind myself what this student's goal is. And then if that matches up with my own goals, and then sometimes try to trick them into my own goals while like convincing them that we're doing their goals. If I think that my goals will solve their goals in the long run or make me look better. Yeah, it's so often that there's just this friction between what you want from them and what they want. And I have to remind myself and continually ask, like, is this kind of where you're at? Where do you want to be? Because for a lot of people that I work with, they want to just be able to sing karaoke better versus me, whose expectation is you're going to be the best in the world. What do you need to do to get there?
Well, isn't that always the teacher's goal? We always have really big goals for our students. Like, yes, I want you should be able to nail this. Look, I can show you. And I think sometimes students really don't even know what they're capable of. And so, as a teacher, you kind of put this expectation on yourself to show students what they could do, what they can do. And, you want to inspire and you want to lift and guide. But yeah, it definitely can be overwhelming or kind of disheartening when a student's just not on board. They just don't care. That's not what they want. And you're trying.
Well, see, the challenge there is to come back and say, okay, well, what is it they really want? And how do we connect with the student where they're at? When you can connect with the student where they're at, you're going to have a much easier time leading them into your world and what you see as possible for this person than if you're trying to push them where you think they should go.
Agreed.
And so to be able to step back and say, okay, well, what is it they want out of this? If they just want to come in and get better at karaoke and just have fun chatting with you and singing with you and get a little better sound, and okay, you're doing exactly what they want you to do for them. Mark Baxter always talks about the gap between the ideal and the expectation, what we know we can do, and the reality, and how there's always going to be a gap there. And to be able to recognize that what we're doing in reality, if they're coming back, if they're enjoying it, if they're progressing, that's what they're wanting. And okay, we get to drop that sense of idealism or the perfectionism and step back into the reality of, okay, how can we create something beautiful today? How can we have some fun with that? One thing I'd suggest as a teacher, and I've seen this work so well, is to actually start a lesson, not with a conversation about what they're going to do today or what we expect to do today, but focus more on what attitude would you like to bring to today's lesson? Okay, let's bring an attitude of curiosity. Let's bring an attitude of fun, of play. Let's bring an attitude of openness or experimentation. Let's bring an attitude of freedom. And then you're going to watch those first responses take over and they're no longer being free or open. And you can say, whoa, we talked about being like just really open and playful. What are you feeling right now? Frustrated. I cannot get this. It's driving me nuts. Okay, let's practice dropping that. That's a great time to just say, okay, pause and breathe. Let that go. Reset. Let's try this now playfully. And go back into that line and see what happens.
This has been fascinating. So good. So great.
So thank you.
Do you have any final comments, Dr. Jon?
Our midbrain looks at a performance as this good or bad, right or wrong, success or failure kind of thing. When we can get out of the midbrain into our frontal cortex, we can start to see this as the process that we are a part of, the journey that we're on. And it really makes a lot of sense to step back and say, okay, yes, there are certain things I'm doing. Again, what's the attitude? What's the mindset I'm bringing to this? And so often, as soon as we can adjust our negative attitudes about whatever's in our space, the journey becomes easier, even if the incline stays the same, as we're on that. And so really recognizing that first response that says we're not capable, wait a minute, you wouldn't be doing this if you were capable, if you were incapable. And so something else is going on, and just to kind of catch that and say, okay, let's just come back to being curious. Let's come back to being interested, excited, being present, and bring more fun to it. And it's amazing what turns around.
One of my favorite things about teaching voice lessons is that it gives just hundreds of opportunities to practice those mindsets. Like, I love the learning how to sing. I think that music is great. All that's true. In day-to-day life, I feel like we have very difficult times practicing dropping those negative judgments and refocusing on what our actual goal is. And with singing, it's this perfect thing. You have this one scale, you have this one phrase to practice it, and then you do it again and you do it again. And the students who stay stuck on that one thing, it's like, oh, I did this wrong or whatever, the big practice is not teaching them how to do it right. It's teaching them how to do it again and again and again and again, so that just the volume of how many times they do it proves that like this one little mistake, it really doesn't matter that much.
I love that.
Absolutely. We don't want to get stopped or stuck in a little mistake, because then they become roadblocks.
Right. We've seen that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. John.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
And
there's
if you are interested in learning more from Dr. John, go to ivtom.org/events, and you can either get the 2022 IVTOM International Conference recording, which is where Dr. John talks about the Imposter Syndrome, or you could even register for the Singer's Path to Peak Performance. Can you tell us a little bit about that program?
Oh, I'd be happy to. It's been so fun to watch how teachers have embraced some of these tools and the immediate difference it makes in their studio. One quick story. One of the teachers shared how she was the director of a choir for a recording studio. And this choir comes in. There was a 10-year-old girl, and she used the words pale with nervousness. She was the soloist.
Oh.
Well, the teacher did two things. She did a breathing exercise, and then she asked her the 5 ands, and the student just relaxed. And she had a great experience as a performer. So these were tools that this conductor learned in this workshop, and it had an immediate impact on this 10-year-old girl. I mean, what would it be like to have a 10-year-old girl leave that studio? My director was my friend. She taught me 2 tools to deal with my anxiety, and it worked. Now, would that be an amazing experience for the 10-year-old? That's not the kind of experiences I had. It's like, no, I messed up. It was terrible. It was bad kind of thing. And so it's really about bringing the tools of peak performance and having them in your toolbox so you can use them to make a difference with your students. And then you're both going to be having more fun.
I love it.
It's a lot of fun.
That's perfect. Well, thank you, Jon. Thank you, Sam. This has been a pleasure.
It's been great. And it's nice to see both of you again. And let's do this again.
Too.
There's plenty of things. It's my favorite thing to talk about. Creating freedom on stage and in life is a really powerful thing. Freeing up that voice is a powerful thing.
Definitely.
And that's one of the things that's so exciting to see what you get to do as teachers, to get people expressing and using their voice. So anyway, thank you. Appreciate being here.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. All right. Thank you for joining us on the Voice Teacher Podcast. We hope you enjoyed our program today with Dr. Jon Skidmore. Like Sam said, go to ivtom.org/events and you can download the Imposter Syndrome presentation. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast, brought to you by IVTOM, International Voice Teachers of Mix. Your co-hosts are Sam Johnson and Amy Geddes. Learn more about IVTOM at ivtom.org and find Sam Johnson at vocalese.net and Amy Geddes at breakthrough-studios.com. Voiceover and theme song by Maz Mazak, and this podcast is edited by Amber. You have been listening to
Ah,
the Voice Teacher Podcast.